Meeting really is, and apparently I'm being recorded. Purpose today is just to have a little fun. We'll obviously give you a little background on BizAnalytica, and talk a little bit about what we're doing with our customers, how the business is going, etc. But also won't be a heavy sales pitch. I have myself here. I'm CEO of the business. I also have our CTO and co-founder, Lokesh Kolsa, who's also be on the call. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing with our customers, talking about what makes us different, talk a little bit about our partners, but more importantly, just have a little bit of fun with a little bit of drinking, which, it's 4:30 here on the East Coast. So almost 5 o'clock, we can round forward. We'll pretend we're springing forward and go from there. It'll be interactive in that, we're going to start right off with a whiskey tasting after my intro, and then talk a little bit about the kind of work we're doing. And then we'll do a couple of other, tastings along the way. And then it'll also be time at the end for some questions and answers. As I mentioned, I'll be giving you an overview. Lokesh, who has more data and more detail and knows this stuff better than I do, will be driving into the things we do. And we also have Walt, who is our mixologist. So I've been picking his brain for all the best whiskeys in the world and all the best bourbons. Obviously it's a business in an area just like craft beer that's really taken off. So it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of new stuff to try out there. And we'll go from there. So we just thought we'd try this, rather than do your traditional kind of marketing event, which we do love to do. We just thought this would be a little bit different. We could do this virtually. People can have some fun and we'll roll from there. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our expert mixologist, Walt Easterbrook.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Thank you all for having me here today. I don't know if obviously I can't see any faces or anything, but if anybody are still able to utilize the chat to talk to me, that'd be awesome. If not, I'm just going to go through my spiel. But basically, just a little bit of background on me. We are the Bowery Collective. We're the ones that help facilitate this event and put these kits together for you. We also do a lot of bigger live events and festivals. So we're happy to be here. Background on me. About 20 years hospitality in New York City, running bars, restaurants, everything from dive bars to lounges to fancy hotels and sort of everything in between. And then I've also was the Woodford Reserve brand ambassador for the East Coast for 3 years. So what we're going to do is keep this pretty high level. We'll talk about Maker's Mark, which is obviously the bourbon we're going to taste today. And then we'll talk a little bit about bourbon itself. But again, if anyone can use the chat and you want to ask any specific questions, I'll get a little bit nerdy. Or if Mark or if anybody else wants to talk and get nerdy on it, we'll deep dive into stuff. But otherwise, we'll keep it pretty high level. In your kit, you also have capabilities to make a cocktail, and that's one of the things we do want to make first. So if you can, grab yourself a glass and get some ice, because we do want to make that old-fashioned cocktail, so you can sit and sip on a cocktail as everyone's going over the content that they're doing. So if you want to grab a glass and some ice, go ahead and do that now, and then we'll get into making the cocktail. So we're going to go through the Maker's Mark. So you have 3 different little bottles in here as well. You have Maker's Mark, which is called the classic. You have the cast strength, and then you have the French oaked. So the first one we want to get is just the bottle that says Maker's Mark on it, not the cast strength and not the French oaked. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And so I want to just give you the quick sort of rundown on Maker's Mark. And basically to understand it, you have to understand Bill and Margie Samuels. This is a couple that lived in Scotland. A lot of the bourbon makers that you see here in America today all came from Ireland. They came from Scotland. They came here and started making whiskey. So this couple, Bill and Samuel, they moved to Pennsylvania, then Virginia, and settled in Kentucky. And then what happened is Bill went off to the war, World War II, came back. Bill and Margie were living together. Margie was telling Bill, hey, you're driving me crazy. I've been living here by myself. Go get yourself a hobby. And his hobby that he decided to do was to make some whiskey and make some bourbon. So that's what he set out to do. To understand this couple is you got to understand both of them. So Margie is a trained chemist. She was the valedictorian of her school. Bill, visionary, graduated second to last. So if anyone's doing business and you understand business, sometimes the best thing is to have two different styles or two different types of people. And that's what this couple is Margie was the creative one, and Bill was the one that said, hey, I'm going to go and make some whiskey. So I'm going to deep dive into the Maker's Mark and sort of the process and sort of some of the branding. Like if you look at the Maker's Mark bottle, it's really, really cool. But we're going to get to that a little bit later when we talk about that cask strength. But right now what I want to do is I want to make that Maker's Mark cocktail. In that bottle of yours, you have enough to make the cocktail and a little bit left over to taste it. So I'm going to pause here, see if anybody has any questions or comments, or if we're all on the same page. Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing great. So, is the old fashioned really the oldest cocktail in America? I've heard that rumor before.
It's one of the oldest cocktails that we know about. The mint julep is very, very old. That's something that Virginia farmers were making in the 1800s. It was actually something they thought was a medicinal thing. They would have it for breakfast before they went to the farms. So the mint julep is one of the on record is one of the most oldest cocktails that we know of. But the old fashioned is pretty much second with that. Now, a lot of cocktails that you see, modern cocktails, are utilizing fresh juices, citrus, berries, things of that nature. Those ingredients weren't really readily available in the 1800s, right? What you had is basically you had sugar and you had bourbon, or maybe you had a fresh piece of citrus. So a lot of the old school cocktails are just utilizing other liqueurs or utilizing a citrus or a bitters, something that they had. You're not making, like if you go to New York City, you go to the Dead Rabbits, the #1 cocktail bar in the world, there's 18 ingredients in a cocktail. Back in 1860, they had some mint, they had some sugar, they put it into a cup, that was a cocktail. Mark, we ready to make the old fashioned?
Yes, let's do it.
All right, so we want to go ahead and in here, you guys have your recipe cards. So we're going to just utilize that from top to bottom. Again, if you're not making the cocktail with us today, just grab your recipe card. And you can make it a little bit later. So also in your kit, you have this measuring utensil. The larger side is 1 ounce and the smaller side is a half of an ounce. That's going to be key into making this cocktail. And then you also have some Demerara, which is basically a brown sugar syrup. And then we also put in there was some Angostura bitters. We're going to utilize that. This is an aromatic bitters, has a lot of cinnamon, some nutmeg, some really cool baking spices to it. Then we also have these really cool funky cherries, which we'll talk about. And then you have a dehydrated orange that we're going to drop into the cocktail as well. So reading our recipe card, we're going to take our Maker's Mark and we're going to put 2 ounces of bourbon straight into our glass. And 2 ounces is filling up this larger side of your measuring utensil twice and just pouring it right into your glass. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm filling up my measuring utensil twice and I'm dropping it right into my glass, just like so. And as I mentioned, you have a beautiful tasting leftover.
Are you supposed to lift your pinky as you move, as you twist this and then drink this? That's what I want to know.
Did I do that? Did I just do that? Or
No.
I always tell people, Mark, do whatever you want with cocktails. People always ask me, what do I do with it? How do I drink it? Do I use ice? If you want to taste something, taste it naturally. Then add a little bit of water. And if you want to add ice, if you want to add mixers, that's what you want to do. If you want to utilize your pinky in this, again, it's up to you. It's your cocktail. Do whatever you want. All right. Our next ingredient is that Demerara, which is that brown sugar. We want to put a teaspoon in there, which is basically just a few drops. I don't like a lot of sugar in my cocktails. I actually like bitters, so I'm going to utilize that bitters later on. But the sugar, we're going to put just a few drops, a couple of squeezes, really what it is. And that's going to be enough for a teaspoon. Again, if you like a lot of sweetness into your cocktail, less is more. You can always add a little bit more of this sugar into it. As we get around the holidays, it's fun to play with your syrups. I actually make like a vanilla syrup. I also do a cinnamon syrup, which is really fun around the fall and the winter as well. You can just utilize some different syrups in your cocktail. So we have our bourbon, we have our syrup, and then we're going to put a couple of drops of that Angostura bitters in there. And again, I love bitters, so I'm going to put as much as I can in there. Again, bitters. If you're not familiar with bitters, you can taste this. It's really, really potent. A little bit goes a long way with this. So be careful. A lot of baking spices in there, like I said, the cinnamon and nutmeg. But I'm a giant fan of bitters, so I'm gonna add a few drops into it. All right. Simple cocktail. Basically, this is 3 ingredients. The next thing we want to do is just add our ice into here. If you do have any large ice cubes, I've got some of those like ice gels that you could find pretty much anywhere. Obviously, Amazon. You can get that as well. But I like a large ice cube in my old fashioned. And one of the reasons for that is I don't like a lot of water. I don't want it to melt. I want it to just be cold, and I want a little bit of dilution. So I've got a giant ice cube in here. That's going to take a long time to melt. If you have your freezer ice, totally fine. I just like a little bit of a larger ice cube. And all we want to do is you have these little stirring sticks in here. Is just give it a stir. And again, all we're doing is making our cocktail cold, and we are diluting it just a little bit. The fun thing about an old fashioned is the longer it sits, the more the flavor profile of that cocktail is going to change because you're adding water to your whiskey. All right. Not last but not least, but what we put in here was these fun cherries. This is called, these are Italian Amarino black cherries. It's from a company called Filthy Foods, and they specialize in premium garnishes, onions, olives, pepper olives, blue cheese stuffed olives, all kinds of fun stuff. Do yourself a favor and don't use those bright pink cherries in cocktails. They're for desserts. Save it for your dessert. Get yourself some really nice cherries. You could put this on the side. You could drop this in. Some people like to swirl the cherries in there a little bit. And if you do have some of that cherry juice that's in your little baby packet, yes, you could use that into your cocktail. It's super, super delicious. And then last but not least, I like a little bit of orange flavor into my old fashioned. You could take this dehydrated orange and just drop it right into the side of your glass. And there we go. That is our Maker's Mark old fashioned. Cheers, everyone. Cheers, Mark. I don't know if you're.
Cheers, I'm with you, my friend. I am with you.
All right.
I'm trying to open the cherries.
Oh, I should have told you. I had mine ready to go.
Oh yeah.
So I cheated on you.
But I will highly reinforce the fact you got to use the real cherries like this. Whether it's in an old fashioned or you just make a Manhattan.
Correct.
That makes all the difference in the world. So a little bit of juice, maybe one cherry, all the difference in the world. Cheers, Walt.
Yeah. Cheers, buddy. And that's it. That's what you want. You still want to taste that bourbon. You want to get a little bit of that bitters and just a little bit of that sugar that's kind of level everything out for you. So Mark, before I pass it back to you, I want everyone to get a chance to actually taste the Maker's Mark. Included in your kit, you had these Glencairn glasses. So I want everyone to go ahead and taste it, just so you get a sense of what we're going to be talking about and what we're going to be tasting. The really cool thing, and we're going to deep dive into this a little bit later, is this is a bourbon, but this is what they call a wheated bourbon. So a lot of bourbons on the market, one of the rules of making bourbon is it has to be 51% corn or higher in your recipe. This is a 70% corn. Most bourbons will have rye in their bourbon. This is actually wheat. So it's 70% corn, 16% wheat, and the rest is malted barley. So it's going to give it a little bit of a different flavor profile than most of the bourbons on the market. So go ahead, cheers, everybody. Give this one a taste and enjoy.
Thank you. Nothing prepares you for talking about the modernization of data like a good old fashioned. All right. I'll roll next. Give you guys a little bit of overview. Some of you that are online are working with us already. Some of our partners and some are new. And so I'll give you a little bit of background on who and what we are and what we do. So the business has been around itself for about 5 years, really started by Lokesh and 2 other partners, and started providing sort of data modernization services to a variety of customers, mostly in the Northeast, and primarily probably to folks that they knew through their own networks. And the business continued to grow over time. A lot of the initial business was time material, was probably focused on contractors a little bit more, and it was good business. It was great. But the team really wanted to find ways for the business to scale and take advantage of the fact that this is a market that's rapidly transforming. You know, we all hear tons of stuff about the cloud and how everybody wants to go to the cloud, and that's great. And the initial focus was all around the applications, and get that there. But the reality is the data is what's driving everybody right now and driving all organizations, whether it's the data that's tied to the applications or the data that's driven into data lakes or data warehouses so the analytics can be used against it to make real business decisions. And it's growing, as you all know, exponentially. It's coming from our personal devices, it's coming from our databases, it's coming from all areas, and it's very disparate, as also contains sometimes very sensitive information. And as compliance and regulatory issues start to take over, there are risks associated with it, as well as cost. And the traditional database vendors, the Oracles and IBMs and Teradata's, they really haven't kept up, and they're really not cloud ready. They lock people into platforms. It costs a lot of money, and it costs a lot of money sometimes to get off them and trade out. What we've been doing is working with key partners that are part of the modernization process, the Snowflakes, to some extent Databricks and Amazon, and helping customers figure out exactly how to modernize their data model and then move that information into cloud-oriented databases. Super important. What's really interesting to me, having been in IT in some way, shape, or form for the last way too many years, I don't even want to say, is that we always talked about how business was involved in all important IT decisions. They need to be with us in terms of building applications and whatnot. And I'd say that was mostly a failure, which is why IT was always at odds with the business. Well, that's obviously changed in many ways, in a lot of different directions in the market, but particularly around the work that we do. It's very typical that the end user is involved early in the process, because they will be the consumers from the analytics engine standpoint. Whether it's Tableau or Looker or Power BI, doesn't really matter to us. But what matters to us is those stakeholders are involved early in the process. And then when we pull together all the data from those disparate kinds of environments, it starts to come into an environment that they can use that's very effective and comprehensive. And we also help bring that across a lot faster. We have done this many times. You see a bunch of names up there. You know, we have deep expertise in and around financial services, healthcare, and retail. And why do people use us? They use us because we do things in about half the time. We've been through this model before, and we have deep expertise around the plumbing and the technology that allows people to get from a strategy all the way to going live with these environments. So that's kind of what we do. We're a services company. You know, we're a little less than 200 people. We have an offshore facility in Chennai, where we offer support for customers, as well as the ability to be able to do solutions in a hybrid model. Most of the senior level architectures, most of that stuff is done on site, whether it's in the customer or here onshore. And it's a real partnering kind of environment. So that's the overview on Biz. So turn this over to Lokesh. Many of the environments, part of why people use us is that we see similar types of solutions again and again. and we can walk people through that transformation. And so we have some reference architectures. We obviously have a lot of methodologies to take there. This is a representative sample. Now, I'll turn it over to our CTO.
Thanks, Mark. So I think, like Mark mentioned, we're kind of focused primarily on the data side of cloud transformation. So as we have gone through last 4 or 5 years, over the time, what we have seen is that there are certain, based on the installs and the implementations which we have done, we have been able to come up with this, what we call the base reference architecture. And that primarily is, tools which we are generally seeing out in the market being used in the implementation. We have picked them as partners as well. So on the database side, we see a lot of Snowflake, Amazon Redshift. We do see Databricks coming up very, very rapidly now. And depending on what cloud you're using, there might be some native tools which might be only for that particular cloud. So, for example, Redshift is only for AWS, Google BigQuery. So those are on the database side of things. But on the integration side of things, then there are other tools which we use. So we have brought all of these together and come up with a reference architecture where we call it the data lake house. Now there have been so many words which people talk about, whether it's data lake or a data warehouse. We for making it more referenceable, we are calling it data lake, but at the end of the day, it's bringing the data together. Whether you want to call it the data warehouse or a data lake, it's at the end of the day, it has all the data integrated into one place. That's the goal where we want to get to, and then not have the silos or repetition of the data by using some of the features of these technologies which are out there. On the source side, you could have real time or a batch system which you want to ingest the data. And so we do see some of the event-based data sets which are coming in some of our customers. Some of them is external data which comes in. At the end, what we come up with is a way to bring all of the data together using Python, SQL, more and more open source, and having supported it by a high performance cloud database. So that's primarily what the reference architecture is. Now, on the data and the analytics side of, sure, the BI, traditional BI is there. Whether folks are using on the customers try to use the data set to have data science, write their own algorithms, or take, AI or the data science tools which are available and install, and that becomes more domain specific. So until BI, that's where we are implementing, and the journey is there. We do have a small data science team, but that's more geared towards financial industry because that's where the domain knowledge comes into play.
Thanks, Lokesh. So, and I'll take this over, but Lokesh, please add color as you can. Why is that needed? Well, I think everybody knows now that there's a huge drive to the cloud for tons of reasons, not the least of which people don't want to run data centers anymore. They want to get the hard infrastructure and CapEx out of their business if they can. But obviously the cloud offers scalability and elasticity. You can retire your legacy systems, but as it relates to data, it's really that elasticity also. So your ability to manage. So I remember maybe 15 years ago, we used to talk about storage resource management. There'd be tiering of data. You put stuff on really expensive spots, and then you could put stuff on cheap spots or keep it on tape. Nobody did it. It was basically all on EMC or expensive data, expensive spot, or is on tape. With cloud, you actually have the ability to tier. You have the ability to look at this, and you have the elasticity that comes along not only with compute, but also with your data, which can offer all kinds of cost advantages, particularly as you get off legacy environments or, hard license-based databases. So there's a lot of that. There's the digital transformation. So people talk about the apps, people are putting things in Kubernetes, they're putting them in Docker. That's great, but without the data there, you only got half the problem. So it's a big piece of the puzzle in terms of a cloud first strategy, which we hear about more and more and more. Even large enterprises, which tends to be where we focus, is probably going to be hybrid environments. More and more of the mission critical stuff is going to the cloud for all these reasons, not the least of which sometimes the applications are just old and they need to be modernized. And some of the things that have been refactored can now take advantage of that cloud, so the data comes along. I talked a little bit about governance. I look at governance and compliance sort of together in the fact that, you have the opportunity to move data from point A to point B being a cloud. And that could be on an iterative process. Do you really want to move 1,000 copies of the same presentation from point A to point B? Do you need that many? You have the ability now to cleanse your data, not only of redundant, trivial, and obsolete information, but you can also make sure that you don't have PII data. So you don't have Billy or Mary's social security number or credit card information. And if you do, then you know it's there and you know how to manage it and that you delete it when and if appropriate. And then obviously, as Lokesh has talked about, the ability to have comprehensive analytics. So getting rid of the data silos in such a way that you can start to pull together data from wide disparate places, get information on a real comprehensive basis, not only easily, but quickly.
I think, Mark, one thing to mention here, a lot of companies today, they want to move to the cloud. And the first impression is that we're going to try and save money. Probably in the long run, that is absolutely true. But I think more than that, what we are seeing is that firms which want agility, so that, to do a quick test and to be able to build applications faster, that agility is what actually cloud is bringing on the table a lot more. Then, the cost of it probably, if you look at it in the long run, still probably is going to be the right way to look at it. But in short run and immediately, agility is one thing which we believe the cloud brings, and we see it because you can automate a lot of provisioning, which would have taken a lot longer in a data center scenario.
And a fair amount of learning through this process, because obviously people have been moving to the cloud or putting tertiary applications, tertiary data up there for a while. That learning really allows us to build so that we can put primary and very important applications and data there and manage that appropriately. Are we up to the next drinking spot?
Right, I think
Great.
so.
Turn this over to you all, who I know you're listening to rapt attention and trying to figure out what the heck we do.
Let's take a little whiskey break for everybody. The next one up, as you can read the slide, is the Maker's Mark cask strength. Just a little bit of a warning, unless someone's jumped ahead, but this is a lot stronger. This is 55.4%. Which means it's about 111 proof. So this is a lot stronger than the last one you tasted. So I like to tell people, warning, however, when you taste this, it's going to be actually quite nice on the palate. So let's deep dive into Maker's Mark just a little bit. To understand that, we have to study the 4 W's. And the first thing that we want to talk about is the water. Kentucky is rich in limestone water. Maker's Mark is one of the few actually bourbon brands that own their own distillery. So that means they control that process from grain to glass, and they utilize a spring-fed lake, and they actually pump real limestone water into making Maker's Mark. Now, if you don't own your own distillery, which means you just use city water, totally fine, it's purified. You're losing a lot of that limestone, which is rich in calcium. It's really good. Add some flavor to your bourbon. The next thing that we touched upon earlier with the Maker's Mark is the wheat. This is 70% corn, it's 16% wheat, and the rest is malted barley. The wheat is a soft red winter wheat. If anyone's ever been down to the Bourbon Trail down in Kentucky, Maker's Mark is about 16 miles off of the trail, and they actually use all their wheat from a farm that's about 8 miles from that distillery. So they get all that wheat locally, and that is a big kind of flavor profile that is in Maker's Mark. And then when you want to talk about bourbon, one of the rules of making bourbon is it has to be a new oak barrel. And the barrel that they choose to use is a char 3, which really means it's charred a little bit longer than most barrels. It's charred for about 35 seconds. And the one thing that I do want to touch upon, which is the last W, I actually have a big giant bottle of Maker's Mark right here, is the wax. So let's talk a little bit about the branding here. So this is something that was made in the 1950s. Most bottles were just typical barrel bottles used for bourbon. As we talked about, Margie was the brains behind a lot of the marketing of Maker's Mark. She was a big fan of cognac. Cognac likes to dip their bottles into wax, so that's something that she wanted to utilize with the Maker's Mark, which is their signature trademark. And then also, and you can see it on your little bottles as well, there's a little bit of a trademark on the side, which is the star, and that is the Star Hill Farm, where Maker's Mark was born. That's the cattle prod that they used on that farm. The S is for Samuels, which is their last name, and the IV is for the 4th generation distiller. So this was groundbreaking back in the day to do something kind of fun and funky. And Maker's Mark is known for it. You can't really miss it. A lot of bourbon bottles on the shelf are brown. This one is obviously bright red kind of components to it. So a lot of uniqueness in their bourbon, a lot of uniqueness with their marketing as well. Oh, that's a question for you guys. Let's get to the cast strength, and then we'll get into those questions. Not now.
That'll be
Very
a question
cool.
for Low Cash, but
I was like, that's not for me. All right, Maker's Mark cast strength. So let's go ahead and try this. The one cool thing about cast strength, well,
over ice or straight up?
Straight.
Okay.
The one thing that I tell people is, if you want to learn about whiskey, taste it neat. And then if you want to understand some of the hidden flavor profiles, which you could do after we taste it, is add a little bit of water. So let's go ahead and try this first. Again, try not to stick your nose right into it. It's very high proof. It could sting the nostrils a little bit. So what I like to do is just kind of nose it from the side, pull back a little bit, and then get my nose right into it. And let's go ahead and try this, and then we'll talk about this cast strength just a little bit more.
That's awesome.
Really good, right? And it's a very high proof, so you think it's going to burn. Obviously, it's very robust. There's a lot of spice to it, a little bit of smokiness, but it's very palatable for something that's such a high proof. It's actually super delicious. A lot of bartender friends that I have in New York love this one, and they love making cocktails with it as well. And Mark, I know you're kind of a bourbon nerd, but you asked me about different, bourbons and different brands that are on the market. The one thing that I would tell you and other people on this call is look out for a lot of cast strength or barrel strength, they'll call it. But a lot of cool things that people are doing is they're doing a lot of personal selections. Maker's Mark, actually, they're one of the people that helped coin the term like small batch. And basically what that is doing is taking barrels from your warehouse, putting it together, and creating the flavor profile that you have here today. So literally, if you see the barrel room that I have behind me, if you go in, drill into both barrels, taste one might be woodier, grainier, spicier. The other one might be a little bit of sweeter aromatics. So master distillers, master tasters, what they're going to do is they're going to take all those barrels, batch it together to consistently make this flavor profile that you taste. However, if you get a personal selection from a liquor store or from a bar, what they've done is they've chosen their own barrel. So a lot of people are buying their own barrel, selling it out to the consumer, and it's really kind of unique because you'll taste like Makers or Booker's or Woodford or whatever, and it's going to taste like Woodford or Makers, but it's going to be a little bit different. And each year, that personal selection is going to taste completely different than the one before because they're just drilling into one barrel and bottling that one barrel. So definitely look out for the personal selections. Look out for those cast strengths. and look out for those unique things that, if you're a fan of something, look for those higher strengths that are out there because they're kind of fun and they're really unique.
So quick question and maybe pedestrian. Why do they call it cask strength?
Yeah, so this is directly from the barrel. So the first one we tasted, this was proof down. So you're tasting the exact same thing. However, the first one you tasted was proof down, diluted with water. So it lowered the alcohol proof in it. This one that you're tasting is directly from the barrel. The only thing they did was filter it, because if you've ever had the luxury of tasting something from a barrel, there's some sentiment in there, there's some wood. There's nothing added to this. It's just directly from barrel to bottle, where that first one you had water added to it and diluted it down, actually proofed it down, which changes it. Obviously, it's a little more palatable and it changes the flavor profile. But this is literally something you would taste directly from a barrel if you went to that distillery.
Awesome. And then why is Tennessee the only people that are allowed to call it bourbon? Is it like French and champagne, even though nothing's changed, but somebody paid somebody off somewhere along the way?
A little bit. So
Okay.
A lot of people think bourbon has to be made in Kentucky. It's not the rule, although 98% of the world's bourbon does come from Kentucky. It just has to be made in the United States.
Okay.
So there's the main rules of it is made in the United States, 51% quarter higher, has to be in a new oak barrel. And the flavors that you're tasting here is absolutely no artificial color or flavoring that is added to it. Tennessee whiskey has the same exact rules of bourbon, although it's got to be made in Tennessee. And then you have to charcoal filter it. So everyone knows Jack Daniels. Jack Daniels is one of the biggest whiskeys in the world. It's the same thing as bourbon. It's made in Tennessee. And then after they're done making it, their new make, they filter it through charcoal, and then they put it into a barrel. So everything is whiskey. There's just a little bit on region or the process or the grain that makes it a Tennessee whiskey or a Scotch or an Irish whiskey, so on and so forth.
Super helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me know if there's any other questions, but I'll be back a little bit later, and then we'll taste that French oak.
Okay, great. So you probably haven't had like these marketing calls where you get to drink all this cool liquor and learn a lot, which is fun for me because I talk about the business all the time, to the point where it's nice to break it up. So maybe Lokesh, take us through a little bit and of sort of how we do it and what is different, because we are different than a typical sort of global system integrator. Not that there's anything wrong with those businesses, but they're more general contractors. They've been delivering the solutions in IT the same way for many years. And I'll be honest with you, I started my career at one, right? And we tend to do things much quicker, much more agile, if I can use that phrase. And our customers get demonstrable results much faster. So with that, I'll turn it over to the master here.
Thanks, Mark. So I think, one of the things which we, coming from a product background, I learned was that, and working in startups, that, to really understand the problem, it is better to have an interactive session. So all our engagements primarily start with where you currently are, where you want to go. And how do you really come to that is we try to do a whiteboard session around it. So all our engagements, when we get started, we try our best that we get on a whiteboard. It does involve a team from the customer side, but also from our side, it gives a lot more clarity, a lot faster than trying to go back and forth in emails or have 1-hour meetings and document. We generally try to get a snapshot, have interaction that the customer can also come on the whiteboard. They can also be part of the conversation and be more interactive. And that kind of sets the tone where we understand a lot faster that where is the current architecture, what is the desire of what do the goals look like. And from there, we understand all the data sources, some of the business outcomes at what we are looking for. Then there are two pieces to it. One is that we can quickly jump onto a proof of concept or proof of value, or we can actually go towards an implementation, which may be that we start with a small target and build on top of it. So we try to focus on the if we are doing a proof of value, try to do with 2 or 3, maybe 3 very focused and critical use cases. And in there, we would select the appropriate data sources. We tried to focus on the target outcomes. And our goal is to bring a base architecture at the end of this engagement. What does the blueprint of the architecture would look like for the longer implementation, for the roadmap for next couple of years, or 6 months or whatever the time frame may be. And what we expect is that these 2 steps, we try to shorten them, and it has been very successful with most. I'd say all the engagements have been based on that. It probably cuts down the time by, I think, by a fairly large margin. We do interactive, while we are on the step 2, we are doing the architecture sessions where we go through and we can talk about data models, how would the pipelines work, how would the, take the reference architecture and try to build on top of it. Because if you start with the reference architecture, then some customization, depending on what the customer is looking for to do, will definitely be needed. So that customization happens during this the step number 2, which is the MVP or POV, or the initial implementation. Finally, we do identify that through the second process. At the end of it, we have a roadmap and we come up with a longer term implementation plan. We might select a data strategy which may be different for different customers because of the requirements and the kind of data. One of our customers has several subsidiary companies where they have implemented an entire data lake solution across all the different companies, using, for example, Snowflake. And it has been a very successful. They were coming off Hadoop, very large financial institution, and some of the data which they collect from external sources has been going into the Snowflake exchange and grabbing it, and then being able to use it across the different companies was one of the strategy which they picked, and the technology enables them. So depending on what the requirements are, we come up with a data strategy, and we want to make it a repeatable process. What that really means is that you may bring today 5 data sources, but tomorrow, if you want to bring in more data sources, how do you kind of create a framework which can be repeatable and be consistent, so that the faster development and eventually being able to do the deployments quickly. The data-driven existence, to be able to get to that point, a lot more is needed than just bringing on the data onto the cloud. So data governance becomes plays a fairly large role, and that is a roadmap process which will require a lot of interaction with the data source teams, with the application teams, and how do you really go on the data so that the quality at the end of the day, which is being served to the end users, is it's going to define the data quality for the consumption layer. So data governance, and we try to, for example, data observation, data quality. What kind of tool set do you really want to choose to be able to deploy them, so that you become more proactive than trying to be reacting after the fact, when the problem happens. So that's how we do follow Scrum. We do follow Agile. Every company has a different Agile, or some have variations to it. At the end of the day, it's still stories, but how the Agile is implemented we're more than happy to bring that with us, or if there's a variation which is being used by a customer, we're happy to work with that as well.
Awesome, thanks. If anybody has any questions, then we can get to that at the end. And quickly, I think Lokesh take them through one of these success stories, but this is the detail sort of diagram of how we got from one point to another.
Yeah. So this, here we took our reference architecture, which we talked about. Now in the reference architecture, we had more components than what is being shown here. This particular customer, we are primarily targeting, they have a very large pool of external users. So their internal users do analytics, but outside the company, which is their external customers, they have a tremendous amount of users who want to come in and consume the data. And the interesting part is because it's a healthcare and needs to be HIPAA and all those different compliances. While the current architecture was all based on SQL Server, which was manually sharded, used across, very difficult to operate as the business grew. And they wanted a multi-tenant solution where they can actually bring all their customer data into one. It should have automatic parallelism. They should be able to devote the compute as per the size of the customers, because some customers are much bigger than the other. The data ingestion, currently it is batch only. So they are bringing the data, it's a healthcare company, so they bring in some data which is based on FSA and COBRA. Their automation tool is Airflow, and they're doing all the ELT. It's built on Snowflake. And then they have a very interesting way. So what Snowflake helped in this case was to be able to do the multi-tenancy. So there are 3 models in Snowflake for multi-tenancy, which is where this was a big success. They apparently had, I would say, somewhere around 10 to 12 different servers of SQL Server, and all of them got consolidated into, and there's no manual sharding as we know on Snowflake. We just put it, we used one of them multi-tenancy frameworks. We loaded the data, and now the customer grid from where the customers come in to look at the data, the filterization of the data happens at that level, passes the filter to Snowflake, row level security, a bunch of features. The PI information is not the features which Snowflake provides out of the box, that only few folks, depending on the roles, they can only see the data as they choose to. That's all set up in Snowflake, and they can filter out, and without much changes on the customer grid, they're able to run the reports from the same data set. So the operational cost went down drastically because now it's all consolidated. The pipelines became a lot easier. It's a universal data model, and the environment has collapsed to a fairly small cloud implementation than the infrastructure which they had to support the implementation in the data center.
Great, thank you. Here's another success story. I think in the name of time, we'll probably move along to the last bourbon tasting, and then we'll wrap up. I think you guys are getting the idea, and I want to balance off the fun here with the detail. And we're obviously more than happy to take you through the detail, some of the work that we're doing. There's a picture on one of those previous slides, and if anybody's been on our website, it's all about Sherpas and taking you to the next level. But that's effectively what we do. Folks who haven't been through this before, we show them a path, and it's a path that we've seen and we know, and in general is pretty safe. All right, I'll turn it over to you, Walt, my mixologist.
Thanks, buddy. All right, let's taste this last one that you have here. This is the Maker's Mark French Oaked. If you're familiar with the Maker's Mark 46, this is exactly what that is. So this is kind of cool. I mean, this is exactly what you've been tasting the whole time. Maker's Mark does not have an age statement on it. They age it on time. A lot of good bourbons will just age it on time. So it could be 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. Maker's Mark average time that they're aging is about 6 years. So what they do is they take it out, instead of putting it into a bottle, they're going to put it into a second barrel, and that second barrel has French oak staves into that barrel. There's actually 10 French oak staves. So the rest is the normal oak. The other one is French oak that they put into those staves, and they'll age it for another 9 weeks, and that's going to change that flavor profile. So, and I wanted to go back. There was a couple questions about, does bourbon have to be aged? The real answer for that is it does not have to have an age statement. It can be aged for anything, but what you want to look for, and it says it right on like the Maker's Mark, it says Kentucky straight bourbon. If it says straight on it, that means it's been aged for at least 2 years. If it doesn't say it on there, if it just says Kentucky bourbon, that means it's probably aged less than 2 years. So I just wanted, I know there was some conversation going on between David and Nash. So I just want to do some clarification with that. So let's go ahead and taste our Maker's Mark French Oaked. I'd love to hear any feedback. I know there's some good questions going on. The more people drink, the more they talk. So let's go ahead and taste that French Oak. Go ahead and smell it too. It's really cool, like caramel notes on the nose. It's a new French oak. So that's actually why they call it 46. So they got these staves from an independent staving company. And when they looked at the file said French oak stave number 46. So that's the kind of stave that they were getting from it. So that's why it's a French oaked. And that's why this was actually just called Maker's Mark 46 for the longest time. They've kind of rebranded. If you look at the bottle, it'll say French oaked, and it'll have a little patch kind of on the side that says 46.
What happens to the barrel after it's used once?
Yeah, great question. So if you look at bourbon and you look how dark this color is, I mean, it's really kind of hard to see. You're like, wow, it's aged 5 years. My favorite Scotch is aged 18 years, and it's a lighter color than that. There's no rules with barrels over in Scotland or Ireland. So what they do is they buy our used ex-whiskey barrels, or we use bourbon barrels. So every time it's used, they sell it, goes off to England, or goes off to Ireland, goes off to Scotland, and they're utilizing our ex-bourbon barrels. So if you're a fan of Scotch, there's a little bit of American whiskey, there's a little bit of American bourbon inside of your Scotch. So it's utilized. So, but think about it as like, just using a tea bag. The first time you use it, it's very dark. You keep using it over and over, that color is going to get lighter. That's why you're going to see a really dark 5-year-old bourbon and a lighter 18-year-old Scotch whiskey, because they're utilizing our ex-bourbon barrels.
Great. This has been fantastic. So much. Thank you so much. I think we're doing a poll as to what people like. So this is a lot easier than the Pennsylvania senatorial race. Just choose one. Do I get to choose? I want to choose one. I don't get to choose.
You can't vote.
Hosts and panelists cannot vote. That stinks.
I've been locked out.
I'm counting on you. I'm counting on you guys. I won't do any silly advertising. We'll get back. We are going to do some follow-up sort of after this, get some people's feedback on how we do this. And I mean, I think this is a lot of fun as things go, and doing this kind of stuff. And we'll probably continue on over the course of the year. We'll probably do one more by the end of the year. So, tell your friends and tell your family members or people who want free booze. This is a really good way to go. And Walt, you've been a great Sherpa through the mixology thing. So to the folks that are not already customers, or to folks who could be potential customers, what we want to be able to offer is a lot of what Lokesh has been talking about, which is a whiteboard session. That whiteboard session sounds like a bunch of baloney. I tell you, it is not. It is essentially what large organizations or large integrators would do over the course of many weeks as they roll the kids off. Oh, here we go. The results. You know what? For what it's worth, I was a B guy too.
Same here.
I'd like C. you know, A is what I'd have. It's good. It's old fashioned. It's what I'd serve people I don't like that much. And B and C is what I'd serve my friends. So there we go. Thank you all for joining. And then again, it's a roadmap type of thing. We're doing these kinds of whiteboarding sessions in conjunction with Snowflake, some of our other partners. Really what we talk about is how you get from point A to point B. What are the pitfalls? And we do it with folks who've done it before. So our go-to-market primarily sort of relies upon solution architects. So senior level technical people who've been through this process, who can share things in a relatively objective fashion, but also based on real life experience. So I want to thank everybody for joining. I do think we have some questions if you can stay on. If anybody's got anything, you send it along. And I think that there are a few that have come through in the Q&A. Why would somebody choose us over a large integrator like Accenture? I think there's a couple reasons. One is, and I use this analogy a lot. So for BizAnalytica people, you can cover your ears. If your hot water heater is broken, do you call a general contractor, or do you call an HVAC or a plumber? We are those guys. Nothing to take away from Accenture, Deloitte, or any other GSI. They do large transformational projects. Many of them do them very well. The size of those projects are $50 million and above. Accenture grows by 20% every year, and they reduce their customers by 20% a year. So they go bigger, deeper with those customers. We're very specialized in what we do. Sales guys bring us opportunities at the far end of analytics or in the application world. We are the folks who focus on the things that Lokesh has mentioned, and that differentiates us in the process. We're also quicker, which makes it cheaper and more demonstrable. I didn't say cheaper rate-wise, but we're cheaper in the process because of the way we deliver. Any other questions? I don't know how to do this. Chat. Definition of data mesh. That's for you, Lokesh.
Sure. So I think, what has happened over the time is there have been a lot of, I'd say buzzwords which have been thrown around. For sure, data mesh does bring a different way of bringing the data in by having domain-specific data being, in its own, creating pipelines, bringing the data by the domain-specific arrangements into a data, call it the data warehouse or data lake, and then eventually implementing and integrating it inside these technologies. But at the end of the day, isolated data is not something which is going to be utilized for doing the analytics. So even if it is a data mesh, ultimately you do have to bring it together. And the data mesh would definitely help in targeting certain sources and building the pipelines, building the infrastructure around that particular domain specific to that, all the way till the data ends up in the target data model.
Okay, cool. One last question, and then all of you guys are connected to us in a way that you can ask follow-up questions. Like I said, there'll be follow-up events, and it's been great to have you. So question was, do we do our work on or offsite? We do what's best in the interest of the customer. Most of the senior level architecture work has a fair amount of on-site face time. We have our office offshore. We leverage that when and if appropriate. But we do kind of what's in the best interest of the customer. I know that sounds like mom and apple pie, but it does vary. Some people are in the office full time, and some people are not in the office full time, some offices. So we leverage that where it's possible. Large enterprises are distributed anyway. So they're in many cities, and many people and many stakeholders are involved. So we tend to do this there. So that gives us flexibility, and it allows us to bring the best staff to the table. So with that, I want to wrap up. Walt, fantastic. Thanks. This is so much fun. Funner for me for sure. And for everybody who joined, I really appreciate our inaugural event here. Feedback on how we can do this better, the feedback on things you'd like to see, and other kinds of topics. From our perspective, our marketing approach is going to be content-based. We're going to talk about things that we know, and things that we can share with the community at large. That's the way we're going to operate. And so all your feedback really matters, and I really appreciate it. Thanks, Walt, and everybody have a great night.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. Take care.